The Jose Soto-Escalera case has been argued and has now been submitted to the jury. Let's take a little bit of time and go through some of the arguments that were made by the state and the defense in this case. Here's what we're talking about today. There have been two lawyers presenting for the state. The one gentleman with sort of white hair has been doing a fairly credible job of going through the witnesses and getting the evidence in, but he tends to stumble a lot. And as you watch this closing argument, it's fairly easy to tell he didn't have a lot of time to rehearse it, and he also didn't use notes, at least other than the PowerPoint that he uses in the initial part of the closing. And as a result, because of that, I think he comes across as sort of unsure. You guys be the judge. Maybe I'm just being hypercritical. You never know. Sometimes I like it when people can get up there and just argue off the cuff because they know the case cold and they don't need a PowerPoint. I think sometimes PowerPoints are the least effective way to do a closing argument. And I've done them both ways. That's one of the reasons why I feel that way. Let's watch a little bit of the state's closing argument here.
Jose Soto-Escalera comes directly from his mouth. I'm going to lose everything. And then he goes on, if my wife found something like that out, oh my God, bro, I lose everything, bro. I lose everything. Remember, as we discussed in jury selection, our lives are a reflection of our choices, right? Our lives are a reflection of our choices. He chose to do this. He chose to do these crimes. August 21st, 2018, you see the genesis of this plan. He chose to do these crimes. Had he simply been accountable, would we even be here? So we know he has a motive. We know he has a motive now because it comes directly from the horse's mouth.
So, in discussing motive, he talks about Jose Escalera's own words. And I think that can be effective, but he went about it in kind of a roundabout way. You may recall that in the initial opening, the lawyer who was doing the opening basically stated what Escalera had said. And it came across very powerful. And that's exactly the way he should have opened up the closing, with those exact words. Now, the words were there to some degree in the PowerPoint that he put up, but instead of going through the more emotional part of this, which is the death of a lovely little pregnant woman, instead of what he's doing is he's going through the elements of the crime. And yeah, you have to do that, but it would be better to tell the story first, because it's the story that the jury is going to remember. They are not going to remember the elements. They are going to fill that in from the jury instructions. So, again, I have a little bit of criticism there because I don't think he started off in a way that really grabs attention. And sometimes it's necessary to grab some attention up front to lay out the case.
Yesterday, we called two witnesses that were very, very quick, right? Two witnesses very, very quick. We had a witness who was a neighbor of the defendant and a witness who was a neighbor of the victim, right? And they came in, they were maybe 5 or 10 minutes long each. And you got to think, man, geez, that was quick testimony. Maybe it wasn't that important. But turns out it was incredibly important. Why do I say that? Because what they said in the videos that they were able to produce confirms and corroborates Kelly's analysis. Why do I say that? Well, because here we are on Southwest Cactus, next door neighbor, we see a truck leaving at 8:11, which is within the time frame that Kelly was able to find, right? She was able to find these times and these geolocations at that time in her analysis. Well, why is that important? Because take a close look at this truck, and what do you see there? You see a fog light, right? Keep that fog light in the back of your mind. Keep that. I want to return to that fog light, but we can clearly see a fog light right there. Just file that away for a second. And then we go up to Tanya's home, right? And here we are at Tanya's home, and Elizabeth Bedolla, the mother of Tanya, the grandmother to be of Josiah. And what does she say? She's the last person to see Tanya alive. She says around 8 p.m. or maybe shortly thereafter, right? So she's the last person to see Tanya alive. Important witness. And what does she say? Remember, Agent Kelly's testimony, 2 phone calls were made that provided sufficient data for the phone's geolocation to be determined in a more precise manner, right? Because in 2018, we have the cell phone data. It's not what it is today. Can it give it puts us in the ballpark. It's not 100% accurate. Nothing is, but we do have very good data. And at 8:25, who is talking to Tanya Wise? That would be a good question. Who is the victim talking to? Who is the victim talking to shortly before her death? Who is she with? The defendant. Right? The defendant. He makes these 2 phone calls, or actually one to him and one from her at 8:25. At 8:25, and that puts the defendant at her house. So he's calling her. Not only is he calling her, but he's right there at her home. He's right there at her home, right? And the question that I would have is, wait a second, if this defendant had nothing to do with these murders, right? If he had nothing to do with these murders, then why is he at her home? And why is he making phone calls to her right after Elizabeth Bedolla saw her leave that house?
Now, he does pick up a little bit as he goes into the actual arguments here. And as I've said before, it is always effective to argue with questions. Why does he do this? Why does he do the other thing? If this is true, then why is this also true? And those 2 things can't be true at the same time. He has a good way of doing that, and I think this part of his closing was very, very good. He is asking questions that essentially the defense is going to have a hard time coming up with a credible answer. Now, I'll give you a spoiler alert here. They're going to come up with an answer for everything, but some of it is going to strain credulity just a little bit. Okay, maybe a lot, but I'll let you judge.
Ladies and gentlemen, this defendant is guilty as charged. There is no question that he is the man who is responsible for the death of Tanya and Josiah. We have him saying that he believed that he would lose everything if his wife found out that Tanya was pregnant with his child. He began planning these crimes several days in advance while he was being recorded in a truck, and then executed that plan with a degree of precision that, quite frankly, is surprising. He was able to carry this plan out and had success for several days. And then he lies to the police regarding whether he had ever had sex with Tanya, when in fact he was the father. And Tanya's DNA was found in 2 separate locations of his Dodge truck, and the geolocations of both of these cell phones put them together at the appropriate place and at the appropriate time of these homicides. The defendant then described Tanya's blood on his clothes to Eric Alvarado, which was also reported the day after the homicide. Ladies and gentlemen, there is no question that this defendant is guilty. He is guilty as charged of first-degree murder for Tanya Wise. He is guilty as charged for first-degree murder of his own unborn child.
Now, obviously, I cut a lot of that out because it was just a rehash of all of the evidence, but some of it was really very good. He talked about the DNA evidence that was on the headrest of the truck. And one of the things I think that people don't understand is yes, the presence of DNA in the truck would indicate that she'd been in the truck at some point, but it doesn't nail it down to the time that we're talking about here. But here's the thing about DNA: particularly in sunlight and in other conditions, it tends to degrade very quickly. So, if they got good DNA off of the headrest, it was most likely left in a reasonably short period of time before it was recovered. And it makes you wonder why he wouldn't have wiped that down. Just goes to show you again how sometimes criminals are stupid. But now we get to listen to the defense closing argument, and she also asks a lot of questions, but I'm going to stop in places and I'm going to offer a few thoughts of my own, which is what I would be thinking if I was on the jury. So buckle up, this will be fun.
All right. As we discussed in openings, and the judge told you yesterday, reasonable doubt can come from the evidence, lack of evidence, and conflicts in the evidence. So let's talk about the evidence that we heard over the last 4 days and why you should have very real doubts about the state's case. This is not a first-degree murder case. Nothing about this case is first-degree murder. In jury selection, you learned that only first-degree murders are eligible for the death penalty. This isn't that. If you believe that Jose did this, it clearly was not planned. And if you believe that bought and paid for translation, and we'll get to that in a second, of that garbled mess of inaudibles, this was a conversation instigated by Eric, who oddly seemed to have done this type of thing before. It was machismo that the state wants to call premeditation.
Immediately off the bat, she essentially admits that Jose did this. When she says, if you believe Jose did this, well, it was a crime of passion. Given what he said previously and all of that, it's really hard to put that into context as a crime of passion. Pretty clearly that this was a planned homicide by someone who had a lot to lose, as he said. So, one of the things you want to do when you're a defense attorney is to get caught telling the truth 3 times up front. That's not telling the truth. It just isn't. In addition, the rather grisly manner of homicide in this case is something that doesn't speak very highly about crimes of passion. It more likely seems like a need to make sure the deed was completely done. Uh, so I think that was a tactical error, a strategic error, however you want to call it. It clearly was not something she should have done. If you think he did it, well, it was a crime of passion. Well, which is it? Did he do it or not? Now you're going to tell us somebody else did it.
The state told you in the opening that Jose didn't plan on being recorded. That's what they said. But not only can you see the cameras, and remember, Adolfo Cavelli told us there's 4 cameras. There's 4 different angles being recorded live. He told you that yesterday, Adolfo told you that employees are specifically instructed when they work for Waste Pro that they're being video and audio recorded. So the state's opening that he didn't plan on being recorded is false. Adolfo told you they know. We tell every employee you're video and audio recorded at all times in the truck. Why would a person actually discuss a murder they actually meant to do in front of a camera that was constantly monitored?
Do I really have to answer you here? Why would he do that? Well, one, he was talking in Spanish, and so he likely didn't think that the management at Waste Pro knew and understood Spanish, so they're not going to know that he's planning a homicide at the time that he's talking like this. And two, he never thought he was going to get caught. And three, the more important reason is because criminals are stupid. That's what makes them criminals. If they were brilliant people who could design nuclear power plants, they'd be doing that. But they're not. They are people who, when the chips are down, that's who you find out what their character really is. And this guy is not a nice fellow.
First closing argument, you have no reason to not believe him. Well, let's talk about that. Rose certified the wrong date of the tape on the formal certification, not once, but twice. The date of the recording, a thing that does not need to be translated. She could not get that right, not one time, but 2 times. She got it wrong. She also told you she makes $95 an hour. And she took about 150 hours. That was the number, 150 hours to do that. That's $14,250. 14,250 reasons to say whatever the state wants her to say.
I believe I accurately predicted that argument would come down, and I think in some respects it's effective, but it's only effective if the jury believes that she was making this stuff up. And clearly there are at least 2 translators who got the same thing. In a little bit, she comes in and talks about the translator who came in and translated live and in court. I don't think that was a particularly good argument for her, but I understood where she was going. At the end of the day, she just continued to pile question on top of question, most of which was on irrelevant material. The date of the transcription, come on. Why is that important? And again, I just think she's trying very, very hard to zealously represent her client, but she's also coming close to doing something which is unethical, which is essentially trying to confuse or mislead the jury. And I think that's kind of in some respects what she's doing. But again, it's her job to zealously represent her client. I'm not making a determination on that. I'm just saying it's awful close to the line.
Both of the translators, Rose and Norma, were reading the transcript that they had previously prepared. They could not translate the audio that sounded like, and I'm so happy that the state played it for you, because it sounded like this.
Excellent sound effects there, counsel, but here's the problem. When they are translating it in the studio where they have microphones, they have foot pedals, they have the ability to slow the tape down and speed the tape up if they want to. But they don't do that in a court because they don't have that ability. And it's played in a big room where there's lots of echo and not good acoustics. And as a result, and of course, the sound is coming off of a speaker from a PC, which again doesn't produce true symphonic sound, so to speak. So yeah, neither one of them could do it in live in the courtroom because they didn't have the same tools that they had at the time that they were translating these tapes. Now, I think she makes a good point about how much money there was to be gained from this, and nobody has credibly explained, at least I didn't hear it, why it was necessary to get somebody other than the FBI to do these transcriptions. So again, there's a little smoke there. Whether or not the jury's going to think there's a fire there is another thing, particularly when you have the cell phone data, when you have the calls between the parties, when you have geolocations, when you have the DNA evidence in his car, blood in his car. All of those things point to only one guy. And so, at one point she says, well, maybe Eric Alvarado, borrowed his truck to do this. I have a lot of trouble giving that very much credence. But then, as I thought the attempt that she made was very, very good. She did a good job as a defense counsel, and I thought the rebuttal closing was not very good at all because, for one thing, he didn't mention some of the stuff that I talked about the acoustics and things. Watch a little bit of this.
Remember, Eric Alvarado also has no motive to kill her, right? He's not the father of the child. There's no evidence that Eric Alvarado had ever had any type of a relationship with Tanya, let alone sleep with her.
Ladies and gentlemen, there's an objection that's to this point. There's a dispute between the lawyers. You're the finders of fact, and you get to decide which side is accurate as far as what the evidence is. So I'll overrule the objection, but leave that to the jury to sort out.
Okay. So anyway, so he had no motive to kill her, and more significant, if you recall, in the August 24th translation with Rose Rosario, what does he say? Well, Eric Alvarado asks him about the blood. Did you see blood? Did you see blood? Had Eric Alvarado been there and been involved in this, he would have had no need to ask that question. He's asking the question because he doesn't know the answer. So we can rule Eric Alvarado out as well. And you also have to ask yourself, well, wait a second, the truth is it never changes, right? I mean, the truth never changes. What if this were legitimate, then why are they offering you all these alternative theories?
So I offered you the one segment from that rebuttal that I thought perhaps hit the high mark, and we'll just have to wait and see what the jury does. If I'm on the jury, I'm still voting to convict, but again, juries see things in a courtroom that you can't see on a live stream, and they hear things and they notice a lot more than people give them credit for. They look at exchanges between the defendant and their counsel. They do. They look at what the lawyers discuss, and they watch the antics of the lawyers as they argue at the bench in a sidebar. And so they wonder why it is that somebody's trying to, change the evidence that they're going to hear. All of those things mean, essentially, in a case like this, even where there's overwhelming evidence, you got to remember there were 3 acquittals at Nuremberg. That's all I'm saying. Thanks for watching. I appreciate you being here today. If you have the opportunity today, try to do one kind thing to help somebody else. Any kind thing will do. Buy somebody a Coke, get them a cup of coffee. Anything that makes their day better, that would be a way to help make the world a better place. Because after all, isn't that what we're all after? Now, YouTube has a few things that they think you might be interested in, and they're going to be showing you that right up there.